Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the Chief Creative Officer and Chief Marketing Officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.
The Sparkfile podcast may contain profanity and other adult content.
Please use your discretion.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Welcome to the Spark File, where we believe that everyone is creative, but smart, creative people don't go it alone.
No, they don't. I'm Laura Camion.
And I'm Susan Blackwell. If you're an OG listener, hi.
Hi.
Welcome back, Sparkly. If you're joining us for the first time, you should know that all are welcome here.
Whether you've put your creativity on hold during this time or you've clung to it like a lifeline, either way, we welcome you.
But you may be asking yourself, ladies, what exactly is a Spark File?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I get one? What do I file in it? These are such good questions. And we have an answer for you.
We do. A Spark File is a place where you consistently collect all your inspirations and all your fascinations.
Here's the deal. Laura and I are makers, and we make all kinds of things.
If you're like us and you're making stuff all the time or want to be making stuff all the time, you know the wellspring of inspiration can run a little dry, especially now.
But don't freak out. We are on the lookout for fresh ideas, images, and inspiration that spark creativity and pique curiosity, things that inspire us to get up off of our asses and make things like this podcast.
Or a trailblazing novel written in your own completely new and singular way.
Oh.
Every episode, we're going to reach into the Spark File and exchange some sparks. And from time to time, we're going to talk to some folks who spark us as well.
And if you're not careful, you might just find yourself visiting other realms. So without further ado, let's open up the Spark
File.
Laura Camion.
Blackwell.
Laura Camion. We are still talking about, still unpacking the spark that is the brain, the work of Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor.
I mean, if you have not listened to last week's episode where Sue sparks me with a whole brain spark, stop what you're doing right now, which is listening to this podcast, and go back to last week's episode of our podcast. Please, it's worth it. It's so worth it. Ooh, that was good.
I'm just struck by the potential application of her work on our lives, our creativity,
our relationships,
our entrepreneurial pursuits. I was saying to you recently, I feel like it's going to improve the quality of our lives.
100%.
Like immediately.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I just want to say out loud, I want to thank the baby Jesus or whoever's responsible for giving us good, healthy brains that can ingest that information and implement it. Because as we were talking about it, I was like, oh, I don't know that everyone has a brain makeup that can, I mean, to be honest, it took me a couple passes to really, and I don't fully understand the depths of that work yet, but after a couple passes, I was able to understand it and begin to weave it in to my brain experience. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that. Yeah.
I'm thankful that you have begun to weave it into my brain experience.
Right?
Yes. Yes. You and your little knitting needles got in there.
Your little loom.
You. Yeah.
Well, that was a fun one. And I keep thinking about it. And I keep thinking about all of our listeners and our clients and how it might be incorporated into their lives, into their creativity, into their work, into their satisfaction. And it's so thankful.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
It's really good stuff.
Oh, you know what I didn't mention when we were recording that is Dr. JBT, Jill Bolte Taylor, says, once you understand those 4 pieces of the brain, those 4 characters, character 1, 2, 3, and 4, not only can you see when your brain character is taking the wheel and sort of driving, you can see it in other people too. And I think that's absolutely true.
100%. And now we have a name for it. And now, we can recognize maybe not just like, oh, she's type A, but right now, so-and-so is living in character 1 for the time being, for this moment.
Or that person maybe got some tough feedback and they've slipped into character 2, like they're in a phase. If you haven't listened to that episode of the podcast, or if you didn't follow along closely, you might be like,
or if you didn't take my instructions, like, 60 seconds ago when I said, go back and listen to that, to that episode first.
Anyway, it's
amazing. Suze.
I'm so into it, but you know what else I'm into? The spark that you're going to spark on me today.
Oh, you're going to be into this. I'm very excited. But I will say, just to wrap that up, of course, I already ordered the book. And so you may get a spark right back at you. That could be a spark back because I'm going to dig into that book.
And also, if you're in our creativity group, you should just know that we're probably going to brace yourself, strap in, because we're probably going to want to do a whole session on it.
I think
because I just feel like it is so useful for humans and creatives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it in terms of how it will help you to create your life, the life that you want, but also, like we said, a filter you could run, your current creative piece through and be like, yeah, this creative piece is really all character 4. It's peace, love, and it's a dance piece that is all character 4. Great. Totally great.
Character 4, character 4, again, please just go back and listen or take a deep dive into the work of Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. We have a client whom we adore, Kenyatta Emmanuel, who talks about he always is aiming to capture the rapture. And I was like, oh yeah, Kenyatta. And I think we share this with him, Kenyatta, and we want to make work that proves transcendent for people. We want to move them through our work, maybe into character 3, and then if we're really doing our jobs well, into character 4.
Let's light them all up.
Light it up.
Woo! Suze.
Cams, what you got for me?
Okay, so I recently celebrated my birthday.
What birthday did you celebrate, Cams?
An important one.
How many's old?
A big one. Oh! It's the big 50. I love it. I know you just would never imagine it from my youthful voice. Big 50, baby. Yeah.
I'm so happy you were born. And I'm so happy you were healthy and alive. And
yes. It's a glorious, glorious time to be alive. And I'm grateful. And it's a glorious time to be working on a creative project with Susan Blackwell. Thankful.
On.
I'm very, very thankful.
So, sorry to interrupt you. You celebrated your birthday. I
celebrated my birthday, and a beautiful friend sent me a beautiful gift. Thank you, Laura Coward.
Oh, Laura Coward.
Laura Coward.
It reminds me how I didn't send you your gift, but I just want to acknowledge I picked out a gift for Laura. I have had it for months. And just when I was starting to wrap it up to send it to her, I was like, wait a second.
What?
I don't know if I didn't quite think through the size of the gift. And I was like, I don't even know if Laura has room in her home for this. So, but I do have I'll just say it's a baller gift, but we might have to rethink it. We'll talk offline.
See.
Yes, absolutely. We'll see. TBD.
All right.
But somebody sent you a sensible
That's
gift.
right. My sweet friend Laura Coward sent me a gift, and that gift was a copy of the book Lincoln in the Bardo. And I, like, immediately right there when I opened it, I started reading and I couldn't stop. Currently, as I write this, I'm about halfway through the book. And let me tell you, just sparks are flying. Flying, I say. I'm not even done with it, but that's not going to stop me from being sparked by this book.
Can I just pause and say,
yes,
I've not read Lincoln in the Bardo. It has been on my list for months and months. Somebody suggested it, highly recommended it to me months ago. And it's one of those things where it's like, if I had a little more downtime, I would love to spend some time with Lincoln in the Bardo. And so I feel like I get to with you today, which is thrilling.
You're going to get to. It might feel like a bit of a tease because I'm not going to give any spoilers. Not having read the whole thing yet. I won't spoil it for myself. But just some examples of how freaking sparkish it is just right from the jump. So I'm going to start with something that I knew about this book before Laura even sent me the book. I recall a story that you told me, Suze, about the author George Saunders and the original spark of an idea that he had for this book.
That's right.
I would like to share that with everyone now.
This is exciting.
Okay, so the following is George Saunders' description of the spark that led to his novel, Lincoln in the Bardo. He says, "Many years ago, during a visit to Washington, D.C., my wife's cousin pointed out to us a crypt on a hill and mentioned that in 1862, while Abraham Lincoln was president, his beloved son, Willie, died and was temporarily interned in that crypt, and that the grief-stricken Lincoln had, according to the newspapers of the day, entered the crypt on several occasions to hold the boy's body." An image spontaneously leapt into my mind, a melding of the Lincoln Memorial and the Pieta. I carried that image around for the next 20 odd years. I'm going to say that again. I carried that image around for the next 20 odd years.
Wow.
Too scared to try something that seemed so profound. And then finally, in 2012, noticing that I wasn't getting any younger, not wanting to be the guy whose own gravestone would read, "Afraid to embark on scary artistic project he desperately longed to attempt." I decided to take a run at it in exploratory fashion, no commitments. My novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, is the result of that attempt. What he does not go on to say, but I will say, is this: Lincoln in the Bardo received widespread critical acclaim. It was a New York Times bestseller and won the 2017 Man Booker Prize. How's that for just an experimental, I'm just going to take a run at it?
Wow. Well, he is George Saunders.
He is. He'd never written a novel. He had, short stories. So for him, this was like a bigger project than he could conceive of. I just think it's extraordinary. And as I'm currently reading the book, even more so now. First of all, the image that leapt into his mind, a melding of the Lincoln Memorial and the Pieta. The Lincoln Memorial, many of us know, is that glorious marble statue of Abraham Lincoln on a 10-foot pedestal as he sits in an armchair and gazes downward with a very serious and solemn look. It was sculpted by Daniel Chester French and carved by the Piccirilli brothers, and the work was unveiled in 1922.
Oh, interesting. So it was
Yeah.
sculpted by like an artist, but like
And
stoneworkers
carved by-
carved it.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
Never knew that. And also 1922. So a good, what is that? 60
coming up on
years. 60 years of like after his presidency.
Got it.
Quite a while.
But it's also coming up on the anniversary of that monument.
That is correct.
Yeah. I wonder if they're going to have a party.
Maybe.
And people could take selfies on his knee. They can climb up there and be like, hi.
I think this isn't the image we're going for right now.
Oh, sorry.
A bit more modern image. But so let's picture in our mind the Abraham Lincoln Memorial and him in that armchair solemnly looking out. And then combine that with the Pietà, which translates to the pity. If you're not familiar, this is the sculpture that depicts the body of Jesus Christ after the crucifixion on the lap of his mother, Mary. It was created out of a single block of marble by Michelangelo, which is housed in the St. Peter's in the Vatican City.
I never knew that it meant the pity. I never knew that. I just always was like, oh, it's the Pietà. The pity.
The pity.
Ooh.
So just sit with that for a minute. This sculpture of the Virgin Mary holding her child's dead body, the idea of Lincoln, a la the Lincoln Memorial, holding his child's dead body. It's an incredibly powerful image. And George Saunders kept that image in his mind for 20 some years until he came face to face with this old idea. He didn't want to be the guy whose own gravestone would read, "Afraid to embark on scary artistic project he desperately longed to attempt." And Sue's like, that alone is just so sparkish. We talk about this a good deal with our clients, this idea that one day the frustration of letting fear beat you down or the pain of not telling the story becomes so great that you kind of say, fuck it. I do not want to die having been too afraid to create this.
Amen. Yeah.
And when we talk to makers, on some of our maker-sodes, we often ask, is there something you need to do before you're done? Which is a bit of the same concept as trying to get at that. Like, is there a story that is burning in you? Maya Angelou said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And I have always felt that deeply, deeply. We have a client, Jennifer Rosenfeld, who has a story that she thinks will be her big regret on her deathbed if she doesn't tell it. And Suze, I realize as much as we talk about this, I've never asked you, do you have a thing you need to do before you're done?
That's so interesting. I don't know. You and I don't ask each other the questions we ask the guests on our podcast or even our clients.
Just something that so they don't write "afraid to embark on a big," despite all of her teachings about creativity, too afraid to embark on this big, scary project.
There are sort of things that I feel like are in the chute. Like I am certain, though I find the thought of it fairly daunting. That sort of daunting is lightening up a little bit, but I have a strong feeling you and I will write a book.
Oh, yes.
A nonfiction book. And so I hope that happens before I get hit by a bus. But if it doesn't, please carry the torch, Laura. Those are the words I'll say to you.
I will.
On my deathbed, I'll clutch
book.
your shirt and pull your face close to mine and say, Laura, write the book.
The book,
and then
Laura.
That's the sound Nathan and I make around our house when we're watching a movie and it's real sad and somebody's dying. And then right when they die, we both go, look. So if I don't get to it, I hope that you do.
I will.
But,
I will.
I have, like you, I have a big Spark file. And there are so many things. In addition to my Spark file, I'm also looking over in the maker corner of my room, which has my painting easel and my things that I want to sew and cut and dye and all sorts of paint and all sorts of things. And I hope I get to those too, but I don't know that I have anything. There's paintings that I want to make. I feel like I think of things and then I get them out into the world.
Yeah. If you feel strongly enough, you get them done.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially knowing who you are and what you do.
Yeah.
I have one that I won't talk about it here at length or anything, but I think and it's really one that I have gotten up out into the world, but it still feels like unfinished or
she's not done yet.
Not fully realized. Yeah. And so I'm like, yep, there's more. But back to George Saunders. After 20 years, he finally gives himself permission to embark on this scary creative project. And what he creates is Lincoln and the Bardo. The Bardo, by the way, if you don't know, refers to the liminal state between two lives on earth. If you believe in purgatory, you might refer to it as the Bardo. But in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, it refers to the intermediate state between death and reincarnation when the consciousness is not connected to a body.
Interesting. When I first heard the title of it, I didn't know what it meant. I thought it was a Spanish word and it was, or like a district in some city in Spain.
Or New Orleans or something. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Nope, not at all. Metaphorically speaking, Bardo can also describe times when we feel like our life is suspended. Like a period of sickness or deep meditation. Like if you're in suspension. Yeah.
So a time of suspension, which could be illness or it could be transcendence. It is not a district in New Orleans.
In no way, shape, or form.
No, it's not what that is. But it also refers to, just want to make sure I want to get this in my brain so I can be like I can sound smart at cocktail parties. I don't attend cocktail parties, but so that it can be,
if I went to them.
If I did, that it is also purgatory. What we know as purgatory, or it's also a liminal space,
an intermediate space
before reincarnation when a soul is not attached to a body. Am I getting that right?
That's right. Yeah. Bardo. He said, although he named it after the Tibetan tradition, he did make sure to sort of weave elements of Christian and Egyptian beliefs regarding afterlives so that he didn't want the reader to bring too many preconceptions of what they thought the afterlife meant. So he wanted it to be just a little like vague enough, but in the general sense of spirits not attached to bodies.
Got it. This is fun.
So truth is, as you know, I'm still in the middle of the book, so I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but I can tell you I'm totally freaking sparked by it. I was sparked by page 1. First of all, I need to mention one thing that is so original about this book. Saunders did a shit ton of research for this book, even though it takes place on a single night in Abraham Lincoln's life. Saunders really wanted to know exactly where Lincoln was in his presidency when his son died. And there's references to so much more outside of that one night. But one of the most amazing things he does is he puts, in some cases, entire chapters together with only historical citations. So what I mean is he would take a few sentences from a historical document, cite it, and then a few lines from another document, cite it, and then another document, cite it, and on and on. It might be a line from a newspaper article in 1862, and then a few lines from the personal correspondence of so-and-so and so-and-so in 1963. Textbooks, biographies, you name it. It is astonishing how much research he did. But let me give you just a quick example. I'm just going to read one page. This is a chapter following Willie's death, but this is an example of how it goes. Mary Lincoln's mental health had never been good, and the loss of young Willie ended her life as a functional wife and mother. In A Mother's Trial, Mary Lincoln and the Civil War by Jane Coster. Around 2 p.m, I heard a terrible commotion from the part of the house where the sick child lay. It appeared the moment had come. Mrs. Lincoln rushed past me, head lowered, making a sound I have never heard emitted from a human throat before or since. Hilliard, previously cited, account of Sophie Lennox, maid. While the president's outbursts allowed for depiction, his wife's did not. Epstein, previously cited. The pale face of her dead boy threw her into convulsions. Keckly, previously cited. Mary Lincoln collapsed into her bed. Von Dreth, previously cited. An altered woman. Keckly. So, and it goes on and on, but it's entire chapters at a time. He didn't write a word of that, but as I'm reading it, of course, I'm like, this has to be 200 hours of research and reading other
for
people's
a small
accounts
passage
to pull in exactly the right sentences that on their own account do make for a whole paragraph.
Cams, you love history.
Fucking love it.
Were you just like, ooh?
I was like, oh my God. Okay, the amount of hours, the amount of knowledge, how thoroughly he knows these people, how he's able to illustrate from different sources people's memory. People's memory is foggy and it's different. There are pages where it's like he's pulling from different sources and it all flows, but one person describes the moon, as a bright white, full white light in the sky. And the next person was like, that night was a grayish silver sliver of a moon. And all these people, it's the same like historic event that they're describing. And it's like, they're not the same. They have different memories of it. So that amazed me. I mean, now listen, I've put sparks together before that are a lot of different sources and I didn't do a lot, but like thread them together and share them. But to write a novel, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And it's really deep. And he finds, just incredibly memorable single lines from sources like close to the Lincolns that make such a difference. And then the next chapter will be all of these extraordinary characters that just came out of his head and onto the page.
Oh, wow.
And they are all the people in the Bardo, all the people who are without bodies.
I know what that means now.
You know what that means? So it is just extraordinary. I mean, I think some people, and by the way, this is another thing to remember, when embarking on the Scary Creative Project, yes, he ended up winning a Man Booker award. He ended up with a New York Times bestseller, but also just as many critics and people who are like, I can't read this. Those citations, it's like reading a citation every other line. I can't do it. And so there is no creation without criticism. I'm just reminded of that. And I'm so sparked by it. Like if we have in our minds, like, I'm going to make the most glorious work of art ever. And it'll be so great. No one will criticize it. I just don't think that is reality. In my mind.
Yeah.
So our solution to that, as you know, has been like, so you don't give the measuring stick to other people. Do you feel it's an extraordinary work of art? Do you feel proud of it? Is it meaningful to you? Put it into the world if you choose to. Great. But let's not make it about like, but what did people say? Because people will say great things and people will say less than great things. I just found that to be interesting as well, that like, yes, he was like showered with accolades. And if you go on Goodreads or if you go on Amazon, there's just as many people going, wait, what? I was told this was the most amazing book.
Yeah.
So whatever.
There you have it.
Whatever is the answer.
It just always feels so different when you're on the inside of, like when you're your work is the one that's receiving that feedback. I can sit on the outside of that and hear you talk about that and be like, yeah, nothing's for everyone. And then when it's your work, I'm just like, I just feel differently about it.
But then to that, my brain answers with, okay, so we can create work that we either don't share with anyone or we don't, it's only seen by a safe amount of people, that we can assume will give us accolades. But if you want like quantity, like
if you want to scale it up.
Yeah. So anyway,
just hearkening back to Jill Bolte Taylor, the little bit that I understand, I think she would be like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, I can imagine if we're in the mindset of we are all one, a person's criticism of my work is just as likely to be a criticism of themselves and their own work.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. So I was astonished by like how he put these chapters together. He didn't technically, in some of the chapters, didn't write a single line of it, but
he assembled it painstakingly.
It's like one paint stroke at a time. It's mind-boggling. And one paint stroke at a time, except that you had to spend 60 hours isolating that perfect
the stroke. Yeah.
And then the next one. So I don't know. Then like I said, in the next chapter, he has these gloriously colorful characters, all of whom are in the Bardo, presumably. And they're all astonished that a living human being, Abraham Lincoln, comes to the Bardo to hold a dead body. And they watch and they are so moved and they crave that being held because they are spirits now and cannot be held. And they want so desperately to communicate with him. So I won't say any more about what happens in the book, but I just want to marvel at that completely unique format and astonishing exploration of a historical figure through a fictional lens. And when we talk about like trailblazing, following your own guiding sense of what the work wants to be, this, I think, is what we mean. It doesn't have to follow a structure that you've seen before.
Yes.
Or a format that you've seen before.
Oh my God, I love it.
And for my history nerds out there, my God, literally any historical person, any historical event can be viewed through a different lens. You can add fiction to it. You can have like a brand new story as only you can tell it. So, speaking of people from history, this book has already, I've been completely sparked, and I'm kind of weaving my what do we make of it ideas throughout the spark today, just so you know. But I am ready for a real juicy deep dive into Mary Todd Lincoln. I think she has appeared in various movies about her husband, but wow, this book sparked me to give a closer look to her, and I want to share a bit of that with you now. According to an article in the Washington Post by Louis Bayard, Mary Todd Lincoln was an ambitious and polarizing first lady. She was scorned by her enemies as gross, avaricious, a she-wolf, cold as a chunk of ice. She was slammed after leaving the White House for basic, quote, unlovableness. A Smithsonian Magazine.com article by Kat Eschner says Abraham Lincoln's wife has been called a wildcat, menstrual, and bipolar, among other things. I mean, Suze, when I hear such an effort being made to shun a woman, I always have the inclination to like look deeper. I usually think, Jesus, why the pylon? Do you know what I mean?
Just counterpoint, I have worked with people who are most unpleasant and they can be women too, that it's not sort of like, oh, they're just owning their power. It's way past that. They're confrontative and angry. Mm-hmm. And so I hear you. And I'm also like, there are most unpleasant people that do exist.
100%. And I think that it is possible perhaps she was bipolar, but when we look historically, and people did not get treatments for it. Now, in today's day and age, the person that you worked with could have the opportunity to get treatment for,
Right.
For anything. But so I'm not saying that Mary Todd Lincoln was completely innocent in this, but I think when I hear like that viciousness, I do think, why the pylon? And it makes me want to take a closer look. So in light of this being like 2021, there's a few things that drew me in, with new context. First of all, Mary Todd Lincoln is typically criticized for her mental health. And I feel defensive on her behalf because there's a few things to know about her before we can assess, and many people have, trust me. But Mary Todd Lincoln was born to a large, wealthy family in Kentucky. She was the fourth of 7 children. She was well educated. This is early to mid 1800s, so that was not especially common for girls. Sent to finishing school, she learned French, dance, literature, music, drama, of course, social graces. At 6 years old, Mary's mother died in childbirth. Giving birth often happened at home. I can't say for sure, but I can imagine a 6-year-old child being traumatized by the sounds of childbirth and then her mother subsequently dying. In 6 months' time, her father announced that he was engaged to someone new. He remarries, and he and his new wife have 9 children together. Apparently, the stepmother was not too fond of Mary and the 7 children from the previous marriage. So for those doing the math, that meant her father had a total of 16 children. So I think, how much support does a child get when a parent dies, the new one remarries, there are 16 children in the house? So these mental health challenges, such as depression and migraine headaches, Mary experienced throughout her life, supposedly began around the age of 6 when her mom dies. And I read that and I think, of course, her mom died. Her mom died. She's 6 years old. I mean, she began, to me, showing signs of grief or PTSD, etc. That makes sense. As soon as she was a teenager, she got the hell out of that house. And she went to live with her married older sister. As she came to dating age, she was totally a hit in society. Hey, those etiquette lessons paying off. She had many potential suitors, including Abraham Lincoln's political opponent, Stephen Douglas, which I think is a spark and which is really interesting. Yeah, exactly. But
a rom-com, maybe. I don't know.
Who's she going to go with? Old Abe or Stephen Douglas? Who knows? Tune in next week to find out. But much to everyone's surprise, she chose Lincoln, even though he was poor. And at that time, it didn't really look like he had much of a political career ahead of him.
Wow.
When she was married to Abe, she had 4 sons with him. Only their eldest son, Robert Todd Lincoln, lived longer than his parents.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of loss.
Edward Baker Lincoln, known as Eddie, died of tuberculosis at 4 years old. William Wallace Lincoln, known as Willie, died of typhoid fever while Lincoln was president. This is the son who George Saunders writes about in Lincoln in the Bardo. Thomas Lincoln, known as Tad, died at age 18, either from pneumonia or congestive heart failure or tuberculosis. This is all according to Wikipedia. Robert and Tad survived to adulthood, and then they both survived the death of their father, but only Robert outlived his mother. So just let me give you like a little timeline. Track with me here. Mary met Abe in 1840. She was 21. He was 31. They fell in love. They got engaged. In early 41, he suddenly and inexplicably breaks off the engagement. They remain apart for a year. Then they get back together and promptly marry. Like 1 year later, they promptly marry. A year after that, they have their first son. 3 years later, they have their second son. 4 years later, Eddie, the second son, Eddie, dies. Mary almost immediately gets pregnant again, and that same year, Willie is born. 3 years later, Tad is born. Now she has 3 children. She's lost 1 to tuberculosis. 8 years later, her husband becomes president. Amidst a pretty challenging time in our country.
Yeah.
A civil war begins. 1 year into his presidency, their son Willie dies of typhoid fever at 11 years old. 1 year after that, Mary suffers some kind of head injury from a carriage accident, which increases her migraine headaches.
Yeah, that's not good.
2 years later, Mary is sitting next to her husband at the Ford Theater when he was shot and killed. According to Wikipedia, she sat with her husband watching the comic play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. During the third act, the president and Mrs. Lincoln drew closer. Mary whispered to her husband, who was holding her hand, "What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?" The president smiled and replied, "She won't think anything about it." That was the last conversation the Lincolns ever had. 5 minutes later, at about 10:15 p.m., President Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. She was holding Abraham's hand when Booth's bullet struck the back of his head.
Oh,
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And unlike the outpouring of support for Jackie Kennedy when she was seated next to her husband when he was shot, the world did not burst out with condolences for Mary Todd Lincoln. Now here she is, widowed, 2 children living, 2 children she's lost. She has to petition the United States government to give her any kind of pension. She literally fights for it, positioning her husband as a fallen warrior, a victim of the Civil War. Begrudgingly, she eventually gets them to agree. 6 years later, her youngest child, Thomas, dies from pneumonia or heart failure at age 18. I mean, is it any wonder this woman struggled? Eventually, her only surviving son had her committed to a mental institution.
yeah.
She was 56 years old. According to Abraham Lincoln Online, Robert Todd Lincoln, the president's eldest son and a practicing attorney, arranged the insanity trial after agonizing over his distressed mother's erratic behavior. He understood Illinois law, which required a jury trial for involuntary commitment to a mental institution. Mary did not realize that a public trial awaited her and was forcibly taken to the courthouse on May 19, 1875, where 17 witnesses testified to her unstable condition, and no witnesses were called in her favor. Again, would you not lose your mind over that?
The whole thing is so deeply sad.
Yeah.
Of course, we're just sort of like, this happened, this happened. But when you think of the events and the emotional blows that these things, it's just extraordinary.
And to never heal from a trauma, perhaps the first one at 6 years old, just keep layering them on. So 3 months after being committed into an institution, Mary orchestrated her own escape. She smuggled letters to her lawyer, James B. Bradwell, and his wife, Myra Bradwell, who was not only her friend, but also a feminist lawyer.
Oh.
Now, when I read that,
That's a spark.
I was like, record scratch, feminist lawyer, did you say? Feminist lawyer. That's 1875. Amazing. It's 1875. Women aren't even allowed to be lawyers, but Myra Bradwell changes all that. She's a complete badass feminist lawyer, and she is a spark into herself. Please look her up. There are stories galore about this pioneering woman. So James and Myra Bradwell worked to get Mary out of the institution. She's released to her sister until her death in 1882 at the age of 63. She remained estranged from her only living son, Robert, for all that time because he put her into the...
Yeah.
So her actual mental, emotional, and physical condition in 1875 is still debated by historians and clinicians and the hosts of the Sparkfile podcast. I mean, people do not know, and I'm certainly not saying that I know any better. I just think that there are far too many stories in history of women with like, quote, foul tempers who were pushed down by society, told to be quiet, who suffered the consequences for not being willing to or not being able to fit the mold. I just think history has been very, very unforgiving and unkind to this woman. In the book, Mary Todd Lincoln, a biography by Jean Harvey Baker, Baker writes, like a flawed marble statue, the cracks of which are repeatedly hammered, Mary Lincoln was a victim battered by personal adversity and trapped by destructive conventions of Victorian domesticity. She may have been the partner of one of America's best-known presidents, but after all, she was only human. In an article on thoughtco.com by Robert McNamara, from today's vantage point, it's honestly impossible to assess her true mental condition. It has been often pointed out that traits she exhibited may have simply indicated eccentric behavior, poor judgment, or the effects of a stressful life, not actual mental illness. And grief. I mean, I think we know so much more about the power of grief now. And we cannot rule out the effects of the quote unquote solutions she was given. She relied on over-the-counter drugs that contained alcohol and what? Opium, first of all. Historian Jean Baker, again, called her behavior eccentric, said her migraine headaches had been mistakenly diagnosed as hallucinations, and that she had been given large doses of chloral hydrate for insomnia. I mean, I would just really love a more forgiving look at this woman's life, and frankly, how we've treated women throughout history who've been denied any support or help regarding their mental and emotional challenges. Them's my feelings. I just think like you cannot take from it when a woman in that period goes to a doctor and they're like, you're hysterical. Yeah. You've lost it. And there was no real help for it. Yeah. And we have such a greater awareness of the brain's capabilities, and what may be going on in the brain now than they did then, obviously.
Yeah. And it was also a time where if somebody needed a convenient way to remove you from a situation, if you were a male someone, you could claim they're hysterical and have them institutionalized and,
and later, have a piece of your brain removed because that was the answer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I think there's still more to be learned there. And I guess I would just I think her life is truly a study in grief. Really, you could put the lens on. And Lincoln in the Bardo in some ways does that, but in a very, very unique way.
Yeah.
So another fascinating paradox in Mary Todd Lincoln's world, and I have not completely figured this out yet. It doesn't seem logical to me, but if you recall, her family was a wealthy family in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And although her family rejected the idea of slavery, according to an article on eHistory by Kimberly Largent, they owned one slave for every member of the family, one enslaved person, what we would call an enslaved person now, for every member of the family.
Even though they rejected the idea, the concept of slavery.
That is correct, which is very hard to reconcile in my mind. But there's some good news here if you stick with me. Apparently, so Mary's father was very vocal about his anti-slavery stance.
Wow.
Pretty confusing because that makes him a slaveholder in an anti-slavery family in a state that allows slavery to exist. So it's very hard to hold that in one's mind.
Yeah.
According to the history website, heathervoigt.com, Mary learned about slavery growing up in Kentucky. Her father's involvement in state politics meant that his children heard political issues debated at home. One of those issues was slavery. One of the enslaved people they called Aunt Sally, was a mother figure to Mary when Mary's own mother died. When Mary heard a knocking outside one night, Sally explained that she had made a mark on the fence to signal to runaway enslaved people that they could stop here for food. Mary never told her father, so she sort of worked in cahoots with who she called Aunt Sally. And her relationship with Aunt Sally helped Mary form her very staunch anti-slavery stance. Again, from heathervoigt.com. Shortly after she became First Lady and moved to Washington, Mary struck up a friendship with her African-American dressmaker and former enslaved person, Elizabeth Keckly. When former enslaved people came flocking to the Capitol during the Civil War without food or a place to sleep, Elizabeth made it her mission to help them. Elizabeth, that's the dressmaker.
Yeah.
Mary wrote to her husband, then President Abraham Lincoln, asking him to support her friend's charity. She also made contributions herself. In a letter to her husband, she wrote, Elizabeth says the immense number of contrabands, that's what Elizabeth referred to them as, in Washington.
Referred to
the
enslaved people?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
They eventually created a program, I think, that even included that name. She says the immense number of enslaved people in Washington are suffering intensely, many without bed covering and have to use any bit of carpet to cover themselves, many dying of want. I have given her the privilege of investing $200 here in bed covering. This sum, I am sure you will not object to being used in this way. The cause of humanity requires it. So, unaware of Mary's growing anti-slavery feelings, radical abolitionist Jane Swisshelm expected Mary Lincoln to be a Confederate sympathizer. When they met at the White House in 1863, however, Swisshelm believed that Mary was, quote, more radically opposed to slavery than the president. By listening to her African-American friends' descriptions of suffering, Mary took up the cause of helping former enslaved people. Through this cause, Mary gained a perspective on slavery that most whites, including the president, did not have. That was all from heathervoigt.com, but a similar sentiment was shared on history.com. They said Mary Todd, even more so than her husband, was a staunch abolitionist. She supported his political career as he rose from the Illinois legislature to become one of the country's most charismatic political orators to speak out against slavery. His views aroused the ire of Southern slaveholding interests. Even early on in his career, Lincoln received death threats from pro-slavery Southerners, and Mary Todd was labeled a traitor to her Southern Kentucky roots. During the Civil War, she felt a deep sense of estrangement and tragedy. Most of her male family members fought on the side of the Confederacy.
Whoa.
In fact, several of her half-brothers served in the Confederate Army and were killed in action, and one served as a surgeon in the Confederacy. I want to pause here for a moment just to think about that. Suze, I have seen, as I'm sure you have, I've seen movies and TV shows. I've read stories about families fighting each other during the Civil War, brother to brother on the battlefield. But until recent times in our country, where politics has divided friends and neighbors and families, I did not have a full appreciation and understanding of that pain, I think, as I do now.
Yeah.
And now, like, this just floored me.
Yeah.
Imagine being Mary Todd Lincoln. Your husband is the president. I just got choked up. Your husband is the president of the United States. You are fighting to put an end to the practice of enslaving human beings. And your family
Yeah.
is actively fighting, literally willing to lose their lives
Yeah.
to defeat you and to defeat that idea.
Yeah.
My heart hurts when I think about that. First, the fact that there's even an argument in favor of the practice of slavery is stomach churning, but that the people in favor of it are her family members.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't mean to make it seem trite. I don't mean to like sum up an enormous topic like this in such a small statement, but it hurts when the values that make so much sense to you, basic human rights, human equality, but the people closest to you don't agree with those values.
Yeah.
It can be devastating.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I have friends and family members who have disconnected from me in the past year. Whether it was when I posted on social media my support for Black Lives Matter, or when Joe Biden won the presidency, or when I chose not to travel due to a pandemic. I don't know. Like, I literally don't know what of my actions could have been so in such disagreement with their values. But I have had people unfollow me on social media, which is ironic because I barely even post on social media. But no explanation given. I'm talking actual friends and family members. And I'm not going to lie, it really hurts. And if the reason is political, as I suspect it is,
Yeah.
it hurts even more. I know I'm not alone in this. I know that families across our country are being torn apart. We're losing important people in our lives because of politics, conspiracy theories, extremism. And maybe they're not dying on battlefields, but they could be at some point.
Yeah.
But they're still gone. And I don't know. I will probably likely do an entire spark on this topic because it is a bounty. I think I'll just say this. I mean, I don't care if someone, I think for a lot of us, it has been important to state our values.
Yeah.
State them clearly. And if these values are not in alignment, like if you, not even that we have to align on everything, but that we need to align on basic human rights. We need to align on those things. And if we don't, then if you want to unfollow me, that's okay. But what is that next step? So we unfollow each other. How are we going to, come back together? How do we heal? I don't know. So that will need to be another spark for another day. But I'll just say our country is feeling this pain. I know I'm not alone in losing people. And creatively, I think the world is ripe to look at the story of Mary Todd Lincoln in a new light. And I think her life experience could illuminate a lot for us right now. Now, I want to go back. Remember the dressmaker, Elizabeth Keckly, I mentioned.
And wasn't Keckly one of the names that's cited in Lincoln
correct.
and the Bardo? Yeah, you just said that name. It struck my ear.
That is correct. Good
That was
listening.
the last name you said.
Keckly.
Yeah.
Good listening, Suze.
Hey, I'm not just sitting over here nodding my head in silence. I'm actually listening. Thanks.
I'm actually listening. So Elizabeth Keckly, woman of color, former enslaved person, she bought her own freedom and her son's freedom and became a successful business owner in Washington, D.C. She's an astonishing spark. Astonishing spark. Please look her up. She and Mary became close friends for a time, but in 1868, Elizabeth Keckly published a memoir titled Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House, which I would love to read and I believe is back in print. According to Wikipedia, although this book provides valuable insight into the character and life of Mary Todd Lincoln, at the time, the former First Lady and much of the public and press regarded it as a breach of friendship and confidentiality. Keckly was widely criticized for her book. especially as her editor had published letters from Mary Lincoln to her. It has now been gratefully accepted by many historians and biographers and used to flesh out the president and the first lady's personalities behind the scenes in the executive mansion. In a fantastic article in the New York Times by Nancy Wartick, the path that had led Keckly to become a first lady's most trusted friend was almost unimaginable. She survived rape and years of beating, going on to start her own business and eventually buying her way out. Then she earned a place as one of the reigning courtiers of high society in Washington. One of a relatively small number of literate former enslaved people.
Wow.
Keckly was also among the first people of color, woman of color, to publish a book. Her memoir is now considered one of the most important narratives of Lincoln's domestic life. She was a historian, and that was really unusual for a Black woman to write as a historian of a time and a place and a White House. Jennifer Flesher, author of the 2003 biography Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Keckly, said in an interview, "Behind the scenes was sympathetic to Mary Lincoln, yet honest about her flaws. The appendix included, almost certainly without Keckly's permission, correspondence from Mrs. Lincoln to Keckly that put the First Lady's difficult personality on display." Readers in her day, white readers, they took it as an audacious tell-all, Fleischer said. You know, how dare she?
Yeah.
To them, there are two categories: the faithful servant or the angry servant. Keckly was neither servant, nor faithful, nor angry. She presented herself, the White House, and Mary Lincoln as she saw them and knew them, and that didn't work. That was all Fleschner. Now, there's so much there. There's so much there. I just want to bring things full circle. The book that Keckly wrote, as you so astutely heard, the book that Keckly wrote in the 1800s was one of the resources George Saunders used for Lincoln and the Bardo. In that same New York Times article, Saunders says, "I don't think my book would exist if I hadn't read her memoir." Saunders said of the novel in an email, "It was reading her firsthand account that made me feel an anecdote I'd heard about Lincoln entering his son's tomb could support a book. It's the most detailed, moving thing written about the death of Willie and his parents' grief."
Wow.
He goes on to say,
"We've got to get our hands on this book."
Right? He goes on to say, "What a life she had," George Saunders said in an email, "to go from slavery to the White House, lose a son in the war, write a book, befriend the Lincolns, fall out of their favor, witness so many historical moments. To me, her book is beautiful, and I think we are so lucky to have it." So this book, Lincoln and the Bardo, which I have not even finished yet, has already had a profound impact on my life and led me down so many sparkish paths, discovering more books and more people whose stories are astonishing and need to be heard. It's made me think about how we have drastically misjudged mental illness, mental differences, and emotional well-being in so many ways throughout history, and in particular, women's mental well-being. It's made me think about what crushing grief can do to a person, what feeling responsible for other people's deaths can do to us, how painful it can be to be separated from family while they're still alive or after death.
Yeah.
What the consequences are for a woman of color to tell her story, her remarkable, triumphant story, until she told her story, until she dared to make it visible to the world, and then was punished once again. George Saunders has also written us a permission slip to tell old stories with a new twist, and what can come out of a spark just by holding in his mind an image of a parent holding their child's body consumed with grief. I'm immensely thankful that Elizabeth Keckly had the courage to publish her book.
Yeah.
And I'm so immensely thankful that George Saunders faced down the fear of creating his book, that he let the fear of having a regret push him to remove the barriers between him and his own creative self-expression. We are all the better for the book and for the reminder that the pain of keeping it inside of us may be greater than any pain we might experience in the creative process itself. And if we can push through, we get to freedom, true creative freedom.
Camian.
There's so much.
There's so much. I just want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, while you were talking, I did pull up some pictures of Mary Todd Lincoln so that I could just see her face. And their last exchange when she was holding his hand at the theater and saying, like, what will Mrs. Harris think of? And, he's saying, I don't know, probably
won't
not
think anything of it.
I was like, it sounds like, it depends on if indeed that is what was said, because
I think it came from her.
Was it a full moon? Was it a sliver of a moon?
Yeah, that's right.
But it's memory is fallible.
Right. That's right.
But it seems like they liked each other. His line reading could have been more dismissive, or it could have been more affectionate, but it seems like they liked each other enough to hold hands.
Suze.
They were also in public, though, but it seems like they might have liked each other.
But one of the criticisms of her is that she had so much influence over him and his political career. I think he respected her intellect. I think, we've seen what happens when we have, vocal first ladies. But I think they had a mutual respect. I really do. I mean, there are stories of her temper, and, I'm certainly not saying that they didn't have, maybe they had a real up and down. She may have been bipolar. We really don't know. What we know is whatever was going on with her, it was, untreated or poorly treated by any kind of, doctors.
Yeah. But I think when you started talking about her activism on behalf of enslaved people, I thought, man, these fighters throughout history, we have people, just the first person that comes to mind, in addition to Mary Todd Lincoln, is Larry Kramer, like somebody who they are comfortable living in the fight for whatever their cause is.
Yeah.
So whether it's, to get people to pay attention to this AIDS plague that's sweeping through a community. And I think I'm so glad for the Larry Kramers and maybe the Mary Todd Lincolns in the world who are comfortable in that fight. I know that it's not my natural setting in the slightest, but God bless those people that they are comfortable with it and they are called to. And it made me wonder how much, it makes me want to read more about her. It makes me want to read the Keckly book.
Me too.
Because that seems, I don't know, based on what I'm hearing from you, it really seems like a peephole into the life, including, it sounds like, from the correspondence from Mary Todd Lincoln to Keckly, to Elizabeth Keckly, that like maybe she could be a fucking pain in the ass. You know what I mean? Just like on an interpersonal level.
100%.
But I can also much more clearly imagine that if she was, I'm using little quoties, problematic for her time, because to take a stance like that, an anti-slavery stance, when it's sort of like it goes against your family's position in many ways, it speaks to financial gain and loss.
Her husband's political career.
All of it. It would be very easy to be, like that is a person who identifies as a woman who is outspoken. And then if you have the legal lever to say, she's mentally ill and to have them institutionalized, like that is some risky business to be that forward footed. And I don't know. I want to learn more, but I'm feeling you and I'm feeling this.
Right. The blame that she took, like I described all the death that happened, directly in her life. But while she and Abraham Lincoln, when the Civil War was going on, they felt responsible for every death for, thousands upon thousands of Americans died killing each other. And so you had people who did not support her stance, did not support, did not agree with her being an abolitionist and hated her for her pushing that. You also had people, Northerners, who were fighting for the cause, but then when their sons died, she was to blame, even though they agreed in the, ideology, she was to blame for their son dying. She really didn't have a lot of people who were like, complete fans.
It's fascinating. I'm realizing now Elizabeth Keckly, who I think famously made some dresses for Mary Todd Lincoln.
Yeah. The inaugural dress. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen some of these dresses in museums in Washington, and perhaps it didn't register. So she's a fascinating sort of Renaissance person, because not only is she a creative artist, I mean, she's clearly a designer, craftsperson, but she's also, by all accounts, a wonderful writer and a historian. And an amazing creative and a brave risk taker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh.
Incredible, right?
This was an old bait and switch spark, because I thought we were all George Saunders and his spark of inspiration.
But we got sparked by his sparks.
Oh, man.
Right?
I love this.
I mean, the fact that he read Elizabeth Keckly's memoir, and that her voice is throughout this book as well, because
literally,
because of how he cites the
and also it sounds like he couldn't have written that without her writing her book.
No way. Otherwise, it would be pure fiction in terms of what we think might have been going on in the White House. But thanks to her voice, coming to us through time, through 150 years later, her voice is resonating through this book, telling us, this is what my eyes saw.
You know what it brings up for me too?
Yeah.
We have clients, and I know I've had this feeling myself, this fear. There's that fear that if they write from their lived experience, they are going to make people angry. And one of the things, or, upset or disappoint, whatever, one of the things that we sometimes say as we're processing through that is, write like they're dead, like write as if, write like they don't get a vote. And I feel like Elizabeth Keckly is a great person to keep in mind about, you may take some heat. You may take some heat for what you write, but in the long lens of time, if you're an Elizabeth Keckly, it really matters historically, creatively, on influencing some great works of art that are being produced in our lifetimes.
That's right.
It's really sort of like, I guess it in some ways it is a high stakes game, but
I mean, I think about so people are still debating to this day, what was the truth of Lincoln? What was the truth of Mary Todd Lincoln? What was the truth of their relationship? Really they want to get in there, and no one can say the whole truth of anything. They can only say their truth. And Elizabeth Keckly shared her truth, what she lived through her eyes, through her heart. She put it on the page. That's all one can do.
Yeah.
Really.
Well done.
Oh,
this was so surprising. My Lord.
There's so much, there's just so much there, and so much more that could be there. But please take it and make it, friends. Get out there and make some stuff. There's a lot to be made of it, I think.
When you were talking earlier about, is there anything I know that I want to do before I'm done? And one of the great it's just like we'll never have enough time to live all the life we want to live and to read all the books we want to read but I'm glad that I have you, Laura, because actually I'm like, oh, well, Laura's like sharing a bunch of stuff with me so that at least I'll get a little taste of it, even if I don't get to all of it.
A little extra. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. So keep reporting back to me on Lincoln and the Bardo. Let's get our hands on Elizabeth Keckly's book.
Yes, indeed.
And it makes me want to read more about Mary Todd Lincoln.
I want someone
be a good
to
musical.
give it a real, yes. I mean, fuck yes, please. She could be a musical. Woo! Oh,
that woman could be a musical. Hey, I think that's it. This episode of the Spark File was made on the lands of the Lenape people and the Seminole people. And as always, we hope that it put another bunch of sparks in your file. Listen to me. If there's a spark that you'd like us to explore, or you've taken a spark and fanned it into a creative flame and you'd like to share that with us, you can email us at thesparkfile@gmail.com or submit it through our website, thesparkfile.com.
We'll even happily take your feedback, but you know the price of admission. First, you got to share a creative risk that you have taken recently.
You can follow us on social at The Spark File and be sure to subscribe, rate, and 5-star review this podcast. If you have a chance to do it, it really helps other listeners to find us, especially subscribing. Also, if you like this podcast, we hope you'll share it with people that you love. And if you didn't like it, I don't know. We're all one. So on some level, that means you don't like yourself. I don't know.
Oh, there's that.
I don't know.
I was going to say, put it in a book and publish it.
Put it in a book.
If something tickles your fancy and gets your creative juices flowing, we're writing you a forever permission slip to make that thing that has been knocking at your door. It's your turn to take a spark and fan it into a flame.
You got to take it and make it. Cams.
Bye.
Bye. When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the chief creative officer and chief marketing officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.